Hello, and welcome to this webinar titled Continuous Manufacturing, Business Case Drivers and Deployment Strategies, hosted by Biopharma Asia Magazine and presented by Debalder, Senior Principal Engineer of Continuous Manufacturing at Johnson & Johnson, and Richard Steiner, Business Development Manager at GEA Group. My name is Stephen Edwards, and I'll be your moderator. Now, please allow me to introduce our first presenter. Debalder is a Senior Principal Engineer at Johnson & Johnson Technical Operations, a group in the Janssen supply chain which provides support to Janssen commercial operations. He has 23 years of experience designing and implementing different manufacturing technologies, of which 12 years in pharma and 6 years in oral solid dose continuous manufacturing. He is a program manager for continuous manufacturing in the Janssen supply chain, where he manages all products and activities on continuous manufacturing for oral dosage drug product throughout the different parts of the organization. He has published several relevant articles, represents J&J on the most important conferences as a speaker or as organizing committee member, and is leading several consortia, CM work group of the IQ Consortium, GEA user group, and CM community of practice at ISPE, where he connects the strongest experts in the industry within the landscape of continuous manufacturing in solids, small molecules. I'll now be handing over to our first presenter. Welcome, Mr. Belder.
Well, thank you very much for this nice intro. Hello everyone. Good morning, good afternoon, wherever you are in the world. In any case, thank you for joining this webinar on continuous manufacturing. And in the next half an hour, I would like to summarize what are the main drivers to produce oral solid dose drug products in a continuous manufacturing manner. But also what will be the potential pitfalls when you do that, because it's not always that easy to be able to manufacture in this way. And I will also show you what the steps are that have been taken by Johnson & Johnson to embed this way of manufacturing fully in our development and commercial organization. Now, before stepping into explaining what continuous manufacturing is, maybe I first say what it is not. Well, it is not a continuous production during 24 hours where you do not stop, or where you work day and night on the same processes. But what it is that, Larry Lee from the FDA, he described it a while ago as continuously feeding, charging material into your process on one end, and then discharging the processed material on the other hand, and this respectively throughout the duration of the process. A year after, some members from the industry, they added to this definition, well, it should have as well, it is expected to have the same consistent quality throughout the process. It is not set by the scale of the equipment, and when you have a continuous manufacturing process when you connect different unit operations to each other, and they are not intended to pause to complete at any one step of these unit operations. Now, as you see on the picture here, the donut industry is doing this already since many decades, this continuous manufacturing. It's a continuous flow, a continuous process where material is feeding in on one end and the final product is coming on the other end. Many other industries are doing this as well. Only the pharmaceutical industry has been slow in adapting this methodology of producing or manufacturing, and the reasons will become more clear when I go through the challenges as well. Now, before diving into details of how we do continuous manufacturing for tablet or solid dose products, maybe I should explain briefly how the batch process is working. In the batch process, when you make tablets, you first take all the different powders, you weigh the correct amounts, you bring them together, and then you put them in a blender. You blend that. Typically, it is a bin with that you move around X amount of times. You blend it, and then you bring it to the next stage. Then in the next stage, depending on if you have a very good flowing material, you can bring this immediately on top of a tablet press and compress tablets with it. That machine is by itself already a continuous machine, so all the powder that comes in on the top will be transformed into tablets, and those tablets go out. And this material is typically taken then, brought to a coating machine, and a coating layer is sprayed on top. If the product is not well flowing or not well easy to compress, then an in-between step is often taken, which is a granulation step. Either that is a dry granulation, which is called a roller compaction, or a wet granulation, which is using a liquid that is sprayed on top, and then small granules are made in this granulation process to allow a formulation or a product to become easier flowing or better compressible. So you have either a direct compression method, you have a wet granulation method, or you have a direct a roller compaction method, which is a dry granulation. Now, all of these different treatments or processes in the batch world, they are separate, and each in-between step, you have a lot of material that is then waiting to be released to go to the next step. It takes a lot of space. There's a lot of areas involved. There's many people involved to do those processes, and it takes a very long time because every step is separate and needs to wait for a release and lab results. It takes a lot of time and effort before your full cycle of this amount of material is processed. But in a continuous process, you can do that all. You can connect all those machines to each other. You could do it all with feeding continuously all those different materials on one side in this line, and then doing all the processes in parallel and taking the tablets at the end of the line, processed and coated even out of your line. That would mean that you would be able to do that in a lot shorter time because you don't have those release steps in between. You could have everything on a smaller space. It would be at a lower cost because you would be able to do the same amount of material with less people and in a shorter time. You will be able to have a higher reliability because you have a very constant stream of your material in your system, and you might be able to get to a more robust process, and you would even be able to develop faster overall. Now, those are the high-level advantages. If we go a little bit more in the detail of those advantages, I will first have to explain a little bit more what are the differences between your batch and your continuous operation. Now, in a batch world, the feeding would happen with weighing, and then you feed that manually in a system. You weigh that, or in containers, you weigh those containers, and then you bring them to the next step. You bring everything together in a blender and you blend. In a continuous process, you feed continuously with loss-in-weight feeders, which are devices which are on weighing cells and which have screws that continuously will drop their powder in the next location. And then you have a continuous blender, which is also a screw that collects all those different powders together and will mix them in a dynamic, continuous manner in a system. So you have continuous feeding, continuous blending versus manual weighing, bringing everything together, and then as a batch, as a total batch, you would blend. The quality control in a batch process, there you have to wait quite a bit of time in between all the different processes because you take samples, you send them to the lab, you wait for the results, and only then you can release for the next step. In a continuous line, because you have a continuous stream, you could continuously measure everything in that line. And everything that passes by could be measured. And because of that, you could collect a lot of data of all the material that passes by, and you would have a very strong data-rich environment where you could do quality control in line at the spot itself. Then the wet granulation in a continuous manufacturing line typically is a twin screw granulation, while in the batch world, that is typically either a fluid bed or a high shear granulation, which are slightly different processes, but both try to create granules to improve the flow and the compressibility. Roller compaction typically is exactly the same, either in batch or in continuous, and also the compression machines used in a continuous line or in a batch line are the same machines. Very big difference between the two is that in the batch world, you try to make everything homogeneous in space, so everything in that bin should be homogeneous, while in the continuous world, you have a dynamic process where the material passes by. You try to create their homogeneity in time in that small space where everything is happening. To be able to do that, there is different ways, different things you need to take into account. Residence time distribution is one thing, so the amount of time that an amount of material stays at one unit operation, which is representative of how well your mixing is in the complete line. So you need to understand how well is your mixing performance of your line to understand how homogeneous you will get it by the end of the line. You also need different ways of doing traceability. In a batch world, it's relatively easy. A batch you link with the raw material batches, while in a continuous world, you have a continuous stream of material where you need to understand which portion of the material is linked to which raw material batch, and if some kind of deviation is identified, where that deviation is migrating through your system. And all of that makes it extremely important that the integration software is doing what it needs to do. So the integration software is one of the most important things for a continuous manufacturing line. I'll speed up a little bit, but I needed to explain this background so that you understand better the benefits. Now, benefits can be split into three big buckets. One bucket is the development benefits. So if you can do a continuous production in a continuous stream of this process, you would be able to do, instead of having to make a batch of 700 kilo for every experiment that you do, you can just run for X amount of minutes, just the amount that you need to understand what your parameter changes are doing to your process. So you can run for 10-15 minutes, change the parameters, and you can run another 15 minutes and see immediately the results. Because of that, you can have a faster development. You could do your development with less API. In the beginning, probably not, because you will need to get to learn your system better and understand continuous manufacturing by itself a bit more. But initially, it takes a bit more effort, but over time it will save you a lot of API, and it will save you a lot of time as well. Because of that, you theoretically are able to do development in a shorter time, which either you can use to continue developing and make your process more robust, or you can use it to be faster to the market because you have developed it in a shorter time. Then you have the tech transfer benefit. Normally, the upscaling to a larger batch size is something that requires quite a lot of material and quite a lot of effort. In the case of a continuous process, theoretically you can run commercial volumes on the same size and type of equipment, maybe even in the same equipment itself, because you just run longer to get more. And then as commercial benefits, you have an improved robustness of your quality attributes. We notice that while we run a continuous process, that there is a lot less variation around, for instance, the content uniformity or the blend uniformity inside your process. So process robustness is easier to achieve, and as a consequence, it's also because you can measure with a lot of PAT tools continuously the quality, and you collect a lot of data. Theoretically, it is also possible to do real-time release testing for different quality attributes. Operational effort should be lower. I explained. You have less volume, so theoretically you can achieve a better yield. So typically a continuous manufacturing line has better yields than a batch process. Like this, you save material in your commercial setting as well. Equipment is smaller, so there's less water and energy consumption. There is no in-between material, so you can save on your inventory. And because your cycle times are shorter, you could theoretically also have a lower safety stock, which is also inventory. You can do measurements in line, therefore less effort in the lab. You have a lot more data of your process, so you understand your process better. And you can adjust your batch sizes so you make your supply chain more flexible, which also becomes more flexible because the cycle times are shorter. Now, it's not only advantages, there's also disadvantages or difficulties or challenges for continuous manufacturing. Well, you need to understand very well the processes before you can really deep dive into the process development. So you need to understand continuous manufacturing and PAT, and the residence time distribution of your process. At this moment, there's still limited regulatory experience in all the different countries in the world. FDA is very far advanced, EMA is as well, but there's other countries that are not at all advanced or have a strong knowledge in continuous manufacturing yet. Also, you need to have your powders flowing well, because they need to be able to be fed with a feeder in this system. If it's impossible to feed them, well, you need to find other solutions to help that. Very low dose products, they are difficult to measure with a PAT tool, so you need to find different ways for your control strategy if a PAT tool cannot measure it. And because you are feeding all the time, very strong variation of your material needs to be blended out as well in your system. So you need to have enough mixing capability to compensate material variation if that is happening. Overall, because there is not so many commercial applications at this moment yet, not too much data is available yet, so business cases need to be defended with a lot of assumptions. There's not too many hard numbers yet to prove what are the benefits and where they are and at which throughputs we can run and what are the changeover times, etc. So a lot of assumptions need to be made, and that makes business cases sometimes hard to define. Also, at this moment, the equipment is designed still in such a way that changeovers not always are able to be done in a relatively short time. There's no cleaning in place system for a full line like this. Typically, because you work with screws and feeders on weighing cells, very difficult to have cleaning in place systems for that. So that makes it relatively hard to clean a line like that. It takes a bit of time. Just to give a number, 3 shifts, 4 shifts are typical changeover times for a continuous manufacturing line. Now, when you step into continuous manufacturing, there is a few big choices that you need to make. And the first big choice you will probably make is, are we going to do continuous manufacturing for legacy products, so conversion of a batch product that is already on the market, or are we going to do that for a new product introduction? There is a big advantages to start with a legacy strategy, so to start with a conversion of a product that is already on the market. You can start to build your knowledge and experience there. You can create a more flexible supply chain if you file that as a second process. So if you can keep that process also in batch, but as a second process, launch it also as a continuous process. And you do not have the pressure of a launch that is breathing in your neck. It's not so extreme pressure to reach the final time goal or deadline of that product. There is already a lot of data available, and there is enough API available. So that might be easier to start off with. And at Janssen, we have used that opportunity to interact with all the health authorities in the world, to have strong connection and strong, deep discussions on the details of continuous manufacturing processes, and use that as an entry point to discuss later on for new product introductions. Now, for the new product introductions, there is a few difficulties or challenges that we have there. First of all, if you take the assumption that you're going to do all of your new product introductions, that's a choice that Janssen has made, well, a portfolio can be very broad and very volatile, so you have to make sure that your supply chain is flexible enough to handle that. Also, the development aspects are there. You have many different sources of variation that you can have. For some difficult APIs, it might be too difficult for the product to flow by itself, so you might need to mix that with something else. There's no previous data available, typically, and it's a big decision from which phase onwards that you would switch into continuous manufacturing. Also, the PAT, you don't have the models immediately from the beginning, and your API might still change. So all the PAT model development work that you do early on might be for nothing if your API is changing over time. Also, real-time release, same story. So if you have a change in your process, everything that you have done for your real-time release will need to be redone or reevaluated. So big choices to make, and some of the drivers of those choices will be financial. So what are now the biggest financial drivers besides what we talked about, cycle time? So if you have your process there already, that will give you by itself inherently a more robust process. You will have your better cycle times, but there's a number of things which are product dependent as well. Will the yield be better? Will the changeover time be better for a new product versus if you would do it in batch? These are things that you need to compare. Also, what are big cost drivers if you install a new line could be, what are the technologies that you are going to select, and are you going to build that in a multi-floor, or will you try to do everything in one floor and then do the transfers from one unit operation to another with pneumatical transport? So these are important questions that you have to ask yourself. And just one example of to compare the impact of yield versus changeover time, I worked out, I will not go into details of the numbers here, just as an example for you, but we have two examples here. A product at a 25 kilo an hour continuous manufacturing line with a drug load of 50%. Suppose that you do 3 shifts, 7-day operation, you would be able, suppose that you are able to save 1% of yield, so you can do a 1% yield increase. Overall, you would be able to save $200,000 worth. $200,000 worth of. No, I'm reading the wrong number. Sorry. So, supposing a $20,000 per kilo API in one case, you would be able to save $11 million in your first product. Just suppose that there's only 10% of drug load, that you only run 2 shifts, 5 days operation, and that the API is cheaper, $5,000 per kilo, then you would save still $170,000 in your total production capacity per year. So that's for yield. Now compare that with changeover time. Just suppose that we would be able to move from 4 shifts changeover to 3 shifts changeover with 4 people. That would save us less than 1 FTE per year, even if the line would be fully loaded. So this is just a very fast comparison calculation to compare what is the impact of yield on a business case versus changeover on a business case. So in those two examples, the impact of changeover is a lot less than the impact of yield improvement, of 1% of yield improvement. Now, what it might do is, if you improve your changeover time, you increase the capacity or the free capacity that you have on that line, and that might be the difference to need a next line or not. So from that perspective, it might be very important. So that's in a nutshell the advantages and some of the challenges in the implementation of a continuous manufacturing line or process in your company. So now in a little bit of an overview I want to give as well is how did we deal with the deployment of continuous manufacturing in Janssen? First of all, if you decide of going to continuous manufacturing, you have the future in your own hands, but still you have to play the cards that you have and play the cards in a correct order and in the best manner as well. These are the cards that we had at Janssen Pharmaceutics. And so when we started with developing continuous manufacturing in our environment, we first tested with a lot of pre-work. We did feasibility tests at universities. We did feasibility tests at a vendor. We defined really the value that it gave us in commercial manufacturing and in development. And we aligned internally very strongly on the business case. That was very important because a lot of parts in the business case are based on assumptions. And once that we did that, we could clearly show that where the assumptions came from and that we all were aligned on the assumptions. Then we could get top-down support to go ahead with continuous manufacturing. In a second stage, we were going to do a proof of concept. So we didn't just buy a new line and assume that it would work well. We built a new line based on the work that has been done in a university already. We selected a relatively easy pilot product. We developed that first product, did a conversion of that product from batch to continuous, and used those results to support the future products as well. So we used the Persista product in this case as a leverage to gain all the learnings that we would use in the different products afterwards and on different types of lines afterwards. And then we created a platform. So we decided that we are going to roll out different lines and that we are going to do all our development on oral solids dose in continuous manufacturing processes. We installed development capability. We transformed the organization to use the continuous manufacturing platform as a default, and we worked on different guidelines and best practices internally to help us doing that. Then we prepared a supply chain, so we built several lines and we prepared a strategy to assure that all the products that are developed in our development pipeline will be able to go to a GSC or a supply chain continuous manufacturing line. We did full capacity planning with upsides and with downsides. We have been building the needed capabilities, and we still are doing that because we are still in that transition phase. And then we have a number of commercial manufacturing lines at this moment. And then the next stage is, of course, to optimize the utilization of those lines and to optimize the efficiency. So improve changeover times, improve yields, improve efficiency of those lines as well. And then the next stage we just entered is that that the best we can do then is harmonize. So identify what works best, create guidelines to assure that this is embedded in everything that we do, and then secure the future with new designs in the future by building on the learnings that we have learned the last few years. And we think that the best way to do that is to create modular designs, fully modular designs with standardization of interfaces that will give us flexible lines in the future where we can take out a unit operation, exchange it by another, possibly with higher throughput, and with minimal effort in the future, we would be able to continue running at a higher throughput then. So that would be then the overall strategy. And of course, all the lessons learned that we have on the way, we share with the rest of the industry, because we think it is very important that we share and that we learn from each other, exchange information, and build together these also modular, flexible systems, exchange information on how we can build and design our lines in the best way, and like this prepare the full industry for the future. Now, how does that future look like? Well, we think that there is a number of evolutions. Cost-wise, I think that facilities will be less expensive over time because we are moving or transitioning towards one-floor concepts versus bulky three-floor lines that we had in the past. There will be multiple vendors, which should bring the price down overall, and we hope that there will be modular design and interchangeability of unit operations in the future. We also think that the benefits will evolve in a positive way. There will be quality improvement of models and of PAT tools, which will bring us less variation in our processes. There will be more efficient lines where yield will be improved, cleaning and changeover times will be lower, and there will be a lot more advancement in real-time release. How should we do that? Batch record review by exception can be implemented over time. Development, we will find ways to do that in a faster manner, and we will find techniques to lower the API consumption while we do development and tech transfer as well. So I think also in the benefit area, there will be a positive evolution. Then on the risk side, we think that the risks probably will be lower for supply chains overall, because supply chains will be more flexible. There will be more lines in the networks. There will be more CMOs that are capable of absorbing some of the volumes. So that will give us overall supply chain flexibility. Technology will evolve and become better. Feeders will become better. Automation will become better over time. And then also the regulatory guidelines and requirements will be more and more harmonized, which will help us as well and lower the risk for the implementation of continuous manufacturing. So overall, we think that the evolution is positive and that over time, the future for continuous manufacturing will be better and better, and it will help us to reach the benefits that continuous manufacturing has been promising us for many years already. That was it from my side. I think we can open now the line for questioning. I'll start to read the first question out loud. So there seems to be many continuous manufacturing solutions available up to compression. Coating seems to be the bottleneck often. Do you have any opinions on the best continuous manufacturing solution for coating? There's a number of vendors that have big continuous manufacturing coaters, but the throughputs are very high, not very feasible for small volume operations. Other coaters are there as well, but they are not very common in the industry. What is my opinion? Well, I can answer that one without mentioning any vendors, because in this webinar we were going to be vendor agnostic. So I think that there is a strong evolution at this moment in the pharmaceutical industry to move more and more towards integrating continuous coating as well. Not yet really the full continuous coating, but semi-continuous coating, where there are several solutions possible. That's in the pharmaceutical industry, possibly in the OTC world, and with manufacturers that have extremely large volumes, it might be different. But what I see in the pharmaceutical industry is that semi-continuous coating has some applications, but I think that it is a smart way to see this as a separate business case, to in your own organization look individually if adding continuous coating makes sense or not, because it is just as well possible that if you add that continuous coating step, that you lose performance, that you lose overall benefits instead of gaining. So I would look at it product per product and situation per situation, not just step into continuous coating per se. I think that the vendors are ready for it. Some vendors are ready for it, so there is solutions on the market, but it needs to be worthwhile. That's my answer there. Any other questions?
Thank you for that, Dr. Belder. But once again, I would like to remind our viewers that there'll be a live Q&A session at the end of the webinar. But please feel free to send in your questions at any time during the webinar, and we'll go through these at the end. Now,
okay.
Allow me to introduce our second speaker. Richard Steiner is a business development manager for continuous oral solid dosage (OSD) systems at GEA. Previously, Richard held a number of management positions at Leistris Extrusion Technique, GmbH, and Rumedic AG, and is considered to be both a B2B marketing specialist and hot melt extrusion process expert. He was educated at the University of Applied Sciences in Nuremberg and the FU University of Berlin, and graduated as a mechanical engineer, MBM and MBA. He has contributed to numerous papers and chapters to a variety of scientific textbooks and is frequent speaker at the international conferences. I'll now be handing over to our second speaker. Welcome, Mr. Steiner.
Hello, and many thanks for this kind introduction. Welcome to everyone out there, and I'm very pleased to have the opportunity here to walk you through business case assessments. As we have heard already, a very detailed and great overview from my colleague Lawrence Debalder. So I think everyone has quite a good overview of what is available on technologies. And I will, insofar, focus a little bit more on the business case assessment. Allow me to a little bit start with something more entertaining for introduction. I'm not sure whom of you have ever heard of a nice book which called Who Moved My Cheese? It's from Dr. Spencer Johnson, and this describes basically living of human beings and a couple of mice in a maze, and they all look for the perfect life in this environment and how to come the fastest way to survive and how to live there by looking for cheese. And if you read this book, you will find nice quotes all over. It's a very small booklet, but being in this industry and business promoting this continuous manufacturing industry now, technology now for a long time, I see still comparisons to these quotes. Of course, everyone is excited about this technology. All over we find acceptance of the arguments and benefits. But yeah, the way how to come there, this is really something which which we need to consider. You will find a lot of, I call it the old beliefs, and these old beliefs do not lead you to new cheese. Which means you have to overcome these new beliefs and these old beliefs. And just one big old belief I always confronted with is, continuous manufacturing is only something for big volume products. Lawrence already gave a hint to that. This is not really, in all cases, true, and I will elaborate a little bit more on how you can identify what is right for your case, for your company. Yeah. The more important your cheese is to you, the more you want to hold on to it. This is what we call the batch bias in the industry. So this is also what we see many times when it comes to business case assessment and discussions. There's still a big, there's a knowledge base out there, and there's of course supporters. And to make it clear from the beginning, there's not always a solution with Conti, but there's still some justification and sometimes also process needs for the batch technology. So we not talk here saying, okay, this batch thing is of history. No, this is. I think it will stay in coexistence to each other. The quicker you let go of old cheese, the sooner you will find new cheese. This sounds very simple, but this is what Lawrence and colleagues in the whole industry, as well as myself, try to promote. Yeah, we want to really enlighten and explain people that with all the knowledge we have today and the experience of implementation the last 10 years at least, nobody should be afraid to go into this venture. There is a lot of possibilities. And then, if you're not afraid, and this is true for every life today, if you stop being afraid, you will feel good. And I'm sure you will find new cheese and exciting cheese by going into this venture. So a little bit more serious. And I do a lot of numbers now on my presentation. I just picked up a couple of findings from the news and from literature. So I came over that saying that today's pharma industry, the overall equipment effectiveness is maybe between 10 to 60%, depending on the unit operation you look into. And partly I can confirm that it depends really on the unit operation you look for. But this overall equipment effectiveness is very important, as I will show you later on. Productivity improvements, first pass yields. This is something Lawrence also nicely described, that if you can even improve that by a couple of percent, this can be a huge benefit. Looking then to the production lead times, this is always astonishing to us. You see there's really you can improve a lot this efficiency here, and this is what is actually about if you look to continuous processing. This is what we want to help the industry with, to gain here the effectiveness and productivity. There was a nice Accenture research work with about 13 of the top companies, pharma companies in the world, with about 60% of the global supply chain. And if you look here at the arguments, what are the benefits? It was to us a bit striking, because what we saw, the cost of manufacturing is one of the biggest concerns. You can see in this research work, and this was published by Accenture on one of the latest conferences as well, the agility of the supply chain, reduction of the footprint. So those are arguments, speed of development and speed to the market. But I want to look a little bit still in the cost of manufacturing. I think this is a bit lost on the way of this implementation projects, because these implementation or projects we went through the last couple of years are really prototype installations, a lot of learning, as Lawrence described it, and it's true for other companies as well. So you cannot really compare, and you cannot really get full experience now on the cost of manufacturing. This will come a little bit later, but I want to show how you can, in your business case, still elaborate on that. And I go around this overall equipment effectiveness every time. So this factor is many times used in other industries, like the chemical industry where I'm from. Yeah. So you will find Conti processes there which run of an OEE level of up to 98%. If you look at the definition here, availability of the equipment, performance, and quality. So yield goes into the section quality. So good tablets versus total tablets. Performance, this is something which we as vendors can very much help on. So how we can reduce changeover times, cleaning times. So how we can make that, bring this to another level. And last but not least, the availability. Okay, this is something which the customer has to define. And here the question, do we run 1 shift, 2 shifts, 3 shifts, 24/5 or something like that? Nonetheless, this OEE factor is really basic when it comes to the comparison batch versus continuous. And allow me this quick example here. So everyone knows the unit operation from dispensing, blending, fluid bed granulation, external phase blending, tableting, and coater. In a batch world, you would have, let's say, you go through one of these processes to each other, and each of these processes has his own OEE. So this is the typical way today. If we go now, and then you have a combined OEE over the whole process chain. You can multiply that, and you can find out on your own way how efficient your process is in your company. But what I want to say is, if it comes to a fully integrated continuous processing line, we talk about the OEE of the whole system. Even if the tableting machine is maybe the one who defines the process the most, but here on a totally integrated Conti line, we talk about the OEE level of the whole system. So what is it, and what will this mean for calculations? Yeah, so we go later into a kind of a net present value calculation together, where you can then play with numbers around, and this is then you can see how to influence that best, and what are key parameters to influence the overall benefits of the line. Yeah. So, but this is all about input to the process, output to the process. This is this key defined measure. We did own studies, as you can imagine. So we have a direct compression line integrated in our facility. We did multiple test runs on our own, 12 hours, 5 shifts, or 24/5, to see what can we do and where do we come up. Is it realistic to plan for high OEE levels above 80%? And you can see already here it is, of course, realistic. So you can do that. You have to run this equipment, of course, on the edge, and you need well-trained personnel for that. But it is doable, and it should be achievable to then justify later also investment in this technology. What other factors are important for the economic success? And these are just collections I put together over the years. So what customers ask for, saying, okay, well, how does it introduce my inventory? Also here, in reference to my colleague Lawrence, we have a reduction of work in progress. But this depends if this is a company in the OTC area, or if this is a company in the ethical area where maybe the API is much more expensive. But there's substantial money in it. Reduction of cycle times, as shown, especially when it comes to the quality test times. Direct labor, I will show another example here. Indirect labor costs when it comes to testing, where you have not any unit operation, a quick check or a test stop, so that you process the material through. Capital investment, this is often mentioned that equipment itself is still expensive because, this is still highly engineered and tailor-made equipment. On the other hand, if you look at the savings due to the footprint and you take into account the whole GMP area, I think this is becoming then more relative. Reducing operational costs, total cost of ownership calculations, we can provide input to that. And saving in product transfer when it comes to development and skipping process transfer work. I think this is a very big argument when it comes to the transfer or launch of new drug entities. Last but not least, this is something which, it's very hard sometimes to get real numbers about that. But quality costs, that's something which each company really needs to look into in its own numbers. What is about less batch failures, rework? So we say a Conti process is per se a Six Sigma process, and this makes this quality costs, or this helps to reduce this quality costs dramatically. And we have cases for that. Here, another presentation from an IFPAC conference. GSK reported first results from one of their Conti API drug substance results here. Product purity, CapEx reduction in manufacturing lead times. You can see everything, really impressive numbers which they have reported. All of the statements before can be supported with numbers, but you also see that these numbers vary dramatically. But this is logic. Each company has its own environment, has its own cost structure, his own processes. So that's why it is so difficult to just give one example that makes everyone happier. You have to really work through to that on your own. What I then later will show, here we have the CDC 50 again, and the example I will provide here is based on a direct compression setup. So we have this highly integrated feeding, blending, and tableting machine, which is called CDC. It's a one-floor design, and next to it a tableting coder. And I have used that in my example. So a typical powder-to-drug. And this is some more pictures about that. This machine is installed with the company MSD, and we also did together a long run, which showed us very clear what are benefits to expect in the manufacturing area. Lawrence also mentioned this argument which we frequently hear about cleaning times. Of course, this is an issue, but again, you also have to look in the current installations where the first results are generated in the first numbers. These are all prototype lines for R&D launch rigs. And of course, these machines are highly complex. When it comes later to manufacturing, we envision more these before shown highly integrated one-floor designs. And then if you look into the strategies to change over, that's now the topic. Is like in the Formula One. If you have to switch over from one car to the other in the Formula One, or sometimes they take it apart overnight and put it together again, it's also a matter of organization. And so whatever the changeover means, if this is just a change of unit dose, or if this is really a full breakdown and change to a totally new product, of course, this has an impact on the way and how intense you have to clean. And so we do now today studies in the engineering phase where we really break down this process down to the minute. And then you can find for the before shown system, including the coders, so it can be changed or cleaned down from 9 hours with 2 operators to, if you have 3 people available for this changeover, in 6 hours, as low as in 4 hours. With 4 people. So this is not just numbers. This is what we also test in our facilities and what we try to help them on the design of our equipment. We have the principle of using hot swap, so interchangeable wash offline elements. You can change the turret of our tableting machine, for example, with a pre-prepared ECM module. And if you have these hot swap parts, you can bring them in very quickly into the machine, and so you can reduce the downtimes even faster. And you can, as this little example shows, the turnaround time goes down if you use pre-cleaned and a product like the ECM module or the feeder, the product touching parts of each of the feeders. You can increase the time available for manufacturing, and therefore the OEE number goes up. Of course, this is a little more investment, but as my numbers will show, this pays back easily. Yield, yeah, also here, some confirmation we can reach with these machines high yields. This is the Remedies project, some numbers from a 180-minute run. So for these test runs we did in the Remedies project, we could achieve even 99.6% of yield. Our own long run with 120 hours, supported by MSD, we came up with a yield of 99.2%. So you see, these numbers are not just fantasy or because we want to make it look nice. This is reality. Okay, now to a little bit numbers and formula. Don't be scared. This is just a finance equation here. This is how to calculate the net present value. And I use it a lot because with the net present value, and not just if you compare it by cost per tablets, so on the net present value, you really can see where your investment, what does the investment bring for your company on a time scale, because this investment is only highly dependent on the cash in, cash out over years until you make benefit of these machines. Yeah. So the good thing here is you have the investment at the front end, then you use year by year, you check what are the expected cash in. So what is the product what is the value of the product? On the other side, what is the cash out means what do you have to spend to make this product? And then interest rate and over time. So we use that, this is a little bit like, as engineers, we use models, predictive models. We look for equations and algorithms to define what's happened to the process, for example. In business administration and financial controlling, you use scenarios. So by feeding this kind of calculation here, you can nicely see what happens and what are your company's parameters to justify the business case. So you can use this before this calculation, and you say, okay, I compare now an investment in a batch system versus a Conti line and the same setup as I have shown before. And then you will come up with a huge Excel sheet. So don't be scared. I don't want to go through to that, but we're saying just how it works. And everyone can reach out to me later to get access to that tool. So we just change one number, and then you know how Excel works. You immediately see the effect on the net present value. Here in this example, we just changed the average lot size from 25 to 50 kilo. And then we do the same with the Conti setup. And if you compare, most of the numbers don't change. Just one number changes, and then you see the effect of the net present value immediately over, let's say, the depreciation time. So you have really a good picture on what does that mean, even if the investment might be higher, but you can see what is the effect on your net present value. And this is, I think, pretty convincing also to your big level stakeholders who have then to agree to your investment. You have such a total cost of ownership sheet where we feed then all the data from your company, and this is really hugely different from which company, but also which location and which country you are in, as you can imagine. And then we generate nice charts. Here you fill in. This is quite a work to do, but this is where we also give some consultancy, business consultancy, if you like. Here then you break down it, for example, to the cost of the tablet. This is also part of it. In this case, you see here, you can find savings of the cost per tablet by almost 60%. Just another case that you see that we really do that on a customer basis, and here some confirmation. In this case, this was a wet granulation process. The saving was almost around 35%. Okay, and this is how a graph would look like. So the blue line is a traditional batch direct compression setup. And on the x-axis, you see the batch sizes. So if you have little batch sizes for low volume products, and if you go bigger for big batch sizes, of course, the net present value will grow and grow to a certain point. The green line, this is the direct compression system. And here you see that especially for the smaller lot sizes in this case, and for this product, which was a higher volume product, you can benefit already at the beginning big advantages, mainly because of the operational efficiency, this OEE factor. Yeah, so this OEE factor came out much higher, and this is the parameter to tune. If I would now play around and say, let's make 60-60, you see that the benefits are going a little bit down. And you see that here at the beginning it's still beneficial, but here at the end then the batch becomes more efficient. Yeah, this is also very logic. If you can see, it is much more expensive, as Lawrence stated. So this is the investment difference. If I go now to a 90% OEE, just to play around with the numbers, and I add another, let's say, 500,000 for hot swap parts, you can imagine, you can immediately see that here in the lower end, because you can faster change over, you can faster clean, this is big benefit. Between here, the area, the surface area between the blue and the green line, this is what we all would call the flexibility of the system, yeah. Another interesting point to highlight, you see always that these curves are getting very flat at the end. If you analyze that clearly, this is the area where you should switch to the next bigger system, let's say next bigger tableting machine. Yeah. So the real economical benefit area is here the growing axis, the first part of the graph, and this is where you can gain the most of the equipment. When it goes flat on the bigger sizes here, on the bigger lot sizes, there's no breakdown anymore, and you run the equipment 24/5 or whatever your availability will be. But here in this part, we would consider and we would suggest to give you a bigger machine, bigger tableting machine or higher throughput. You can use the same model to say, okay, I have now also a low volume but high value product, and this is the red and the grayish line here. So you see, because the API is high and the savings even higher when it comes to the yield, etc., this is almost skyrocketing here, the benefit. So this is why now it's getting more and more common sense to use this for new drug entities, for more orphan or rare drugs with a lower volume and high value. This is why now the industry changed the old belief from big volume and low cost drugs to no, it's maybe more efficient or more helpful to Conti technology for the opposite side of the arm. This is why I mentioned at the beginning of my presentation, old beliefs. You have to question old beliefs, you have to challenge your old beliefs, and you have to challenge them by numbers. And this model which I showed you, this scenario technology helps you to draw a map of what is your company's portfolio. And just to support this, I recently found a nice presentation or text published in Japan, where similar idea, they used the net present cost scenarios. And you can see in this little graph, I recommend this paper very much. You can see there are also areas where Conti is beneficial. and a little bit on the left end as well. And there's an area in between where they found batch is beneficial. So there's still some area where batch equipment seems to have some advantages. But if you really look close to it, you will find the reason here is, of course, the changeover times. If we can reduce these changeover times, all the dissection will become smaller and smaller. Okay, now I'm also at the end of my presentation. I just want to give you just a brief outlook to how we see this will look like, and we already have equipment for that, as you could see in the pictures. So the one-floor design and the modularized one-floor design will be the future, to also make it from the ergonomic standpoint much easier for the operators to work when it comes to changeover, but also to oversee the processes which are running in parallel. And yeah, so that will be what we call the one-floor design. And with this picture, I thank the whole audience for listening to me, and yeah, I'm looking forward for questions.
Thank you, Mr. Steiner. As mentioned, now we will begin the question and answer session. But once again, I would like to remind the audience that you can still send your questions in via the questions tab located directly below your webinar screen. As well as this, there are a few questions that we would like to pose to you. You'll be able to put your votes in down below the webinar screen. Thank you. So our first question is, how many pharma companies and CMOs have really engaged in this shift towards continuous manufacturing? Mr. Debalder, I believe this is for you.
Well, my point of view is I talk to a lot of colleagues in the pharmaceutical industry. I think that in the pharmaceutical industry, for pharmaceutical products, everybody is engaged. All the big pharma companies, they are investing in either production lines for commercial applications and for development, or only for development, or only on at the pilot level at this moment, but specifically for oral solid dose drug product. All companies are fully engaged. That on one hand. In the drug substance world, there is a migration, there is a movement. So some companies are working on that, others not at all. But there is a movement. It's being picked up more and more, and it's advancing. Slightly behind on the drug product side, or the drug substance is slightly behind compared to drug product on that curve. And then CMOs. Well, there's 3 CMOs that are building or having drug product for oral solid dose continuous manufacturing lines, and several have concrete plans to step into this world as well. So that's, I think, in a nutshell. Maybe Richard has a slightly other or more detailed view on this.
Well, not necessarily, Lauren. Thanks. It's the same summary when it comes to the CMOs, CDMOs, but I want just to add that I really found over the last 2 years, especially on most of the conferences, we see more and more presentations from applications or continuous processes, process reports about the drug substance part, and I see that I see this is very positive, and it goes into the right direction, because if you define much better the quality and the material attributes inbound, this will help a lot on the drug product manufacturing side. Yeah, and this might be possible, and this is really a tendency I see, that companies more and more try to go to the direct compression path to just avoid, where they can, granulation technologies at all. Yeah, and so there's, I think, a good argument and to look into the drug substance part, and then to help downstream in the conversion to the finishing of the tablets, etc. These processes to get even more lean and easier to handle. It will be interesting to see how this will evolve over the next couple of years, but I think all the before said benefits for continuous processing are true also for the drug substance side. And the chemical industry was the front runner when it comes to continuous processing all over the world. And if you look to chemical plants, this is not new at all.
Thank you. Our next question is, what has a bigger impact on the overall business case assessment, downtime or utilization through throughput on the Conti line? Richard, I believe this is for you.
So I think the utilization is key, particular as this equipment comes not very cheap. So you have to have a lot of engineering in that involved, and to really justify this in business cases, you have to have a good utilization of your manufacturing equipment. It's a little bit different if you talk about the the development, etc. And when it comes to very expensive drugs, where sometimes it's enough to run this rig for a couple of weeks instead of a whole year. But again, so I think to justify that, you have to have a strong business case and a good utilization of your rig. And it was mentioned as well before, the companies who have invested until now in this technology, they are actually working to get this equipment really fully utilized and develop products for it or transfer products to it to show the benefits on a real manufacturing scale. And this is what I wanted to show with my numbers as well. You have to run it on a top notch to really see the full benefits and to see the what it can bring for your supply chain.
Thank you. And now I'd like to take this time to pose our next question to our audience participants as, what is the main challenges for the CM implementation in your company? We'd love to hear your answers. And now next question for our presenters is, what is the main benefit of the Conti technology when it comes to the cost saving factors, space, material savings, or work in progress, and who to quantify? Richard, I believe this is for you again.
I would like to pass it on to Lawrence.
Well, I can think about it, but I don't have the numbers right in front of me. But the biggest savings for Janssen, in any case, for the continuous manufacturing lines deployment overall as a platform, will come from the tech transfer benefits, because we take the assumption that there's not too much scale-up activities needed if we have similar equipment in our development organization and in our commercial organization. There's several other companies that take that approach as well, and we think that like this we can minimize tech transfer effort when we bring that to the commercial. So we've calculated that, and that is the base for our business cases in our platforms. So that's overall, but we also have two lines which we have installed purely for conversion from batch to continuous, and there the biggest driver of the benefits was yield. Not so much inventory in our case; it's really yield. Because in some cases, inventory, for instance, safety stock, it can be calculated in a way that if your runtime is a lot longer or your batch size is a lot bigger, that increases your safety stock. So it's not because your cycle time is shorter by itself that your inventory automatically will go down. Because of the work in process that you have less, that inventory will go down, but your safety stock not automatically. So that would be my answer for Janssen then.
Thank you. Our next question is, what are the biggest lessons learned on the design and implementation of the equipment? Lawrence, would you like to take this?
Yeah, well, I'll probably only give the top three because there's many. You can go in a lot of detail there, but I think the three biggest lessons learned on the design of the equipment are one, the automation is absolutely key and critical, and there's many aspects of it. Two biggest aspects probably is that your automation preferably is very clearly bucketized, because if it's a cloud of automation software spread over all the different unit operations and you have a small change somewhere, you need to change that in many different locations all over your software. That makes things very difficult, and it's easy that mistakes and bugs sneak in. So that's one aspect of the automation. Second aspect of the automation is the communication and assuring that the automation is flawless. So qualification of that automation and doing as much as possible work up front on bench tops. That would be the learning that we have. So automation is one. Second is feeders. So the feeders is key. You hear that all the time in continuous manufacturing conferences. But we've learned that also the hard way that any vibration that can reach those feeders, which are very sensitive and on weight scales, they interrupt your production and they might have a strong effect on your process. So vibration moving towards your feeder is one thing, and the handling of bad flowing materials. So as soon as you have lumps in your system or stickiness or electrostatic load, your feeders need to be able to deal with that. So optimization of feeders, or the impact of the design of the feeders, was a second. And the last thing is the amount of parts that a continuous manufacturing line has. And not only it has many parts, which you need to clean and take apart and put together again, but also it's not always foolproof. And that can cost a lot of time at reassembly. And there can be human errors, and you have to start over again, and that can be very impactful in your line. So automation, feeders, and the amount of parts.
Thank you.
If I could add something from our perspective, I think we would fully support this automation part, because we see that the automation, the integration of all these unit operations, that's a big part of the project execution, and it's really a big part also of the engineering times and our spend to get these systems up to validation. But there's good experience now there, and I think a lot of improvements have been made. When it comes to the feeders, I think this feeder technology is since decades in the chemical industry well known. So I think the feeders per se are well designed, but of course it comes down to the part where you integrate them into the line and into the system. And we have experience with these multiple floors or with this highly integrated systems nowadays, and we have even made our own design of the feeder, of the loss and weight feeder technology, because we found there is some real need to make a CGMP design and to understand those feeders better. The feeder is the first step into a conti process and is quality defining. The feeder is also the first PAT tool online, and this is where the criticality lies in, and this is why everyone looks also to the feeders very carefully. But I think they are now in a state today where you can get great information from, and they are running well if you set them up well. We think what should be a lesson learned is that in all these prototypes we have installed, there was a lot of technologies embedded and a lot of complexity added. So we usually suggest to customers going into this venture, say, you start maybe a little smaller at the beginning, and as you learn, you can add the modules up or downstream. And the direct compression part is a nice step into this. It's easy to oversight, it's easy to handle, and this is maybe a good starting point for someone who wants to look into that from the first step.
Thank you.
And last but not least, I think regulatories, especially the big regulatory bodies around the world like FDA, EMA, or even the Japanese PMDA, they are very receptive and very open to that, open-minded. And this is many times mentioned as a hurdle or perceived as a risk. But if you take these regulatory bodies early on your journey for this CM implementation, I think they will not hinder you if you show them the benefit of it, and they have a lot of good expectations in this technology.
Thank you for that. Our next question is, how is Janssen's experience with CM in process control for a CM line? Is there a need for in-process control when the process comes into steady state? And is the process monitoring itself sufficient for real-time release from a CM line? Lawrence, would you like to answer this first?
Well, with the process control, I assume that you mean their adjustment of your parameter settings depending on the readout of the PAT tools. At Janssen, we are not doing that. So we create a process, we keep that process where it is, and then we run without actively adjusting the process parameters, except of course for the standard feedback systems that are integrated in, like the tablet press and the integrated loop that you have in the feeders. And so those processes, they are embedded, so that's also a kind of in-process control. But further, the feedback and the feed forward of the readouts that you do in the line and adjust your unit operations, based on that, we do not do that. I know that there's a few companies that are using it. They show that for some formulations, they achieve a narrower distribution around the set point for some of the properties. Now, or some of the parameters. Now that has not been needed for the formulations at Janssen, and we see it as something relatively complicated as well, because as soon as you start, for instance, adjusting throughput based on other things, well, throughput is linked with your residence time distribution, with the amount of blending that you have in your system. So you need to validate the complete space around that, and that might become complicated as well. So answer to this, is process monitoring by itself sufficient for real-time release from a CM line? I think yes. But real-time release, of course, is very complicated, as many different aspects. But you do not need to do in-process control or adjustment of your settings to be able to do real-time release.
Thank you. Richard, do you have anything to add? I just want to support Lawrence in this point as well, saying our experience is that you can even make very stable processes with so-called soft PET parameter control. You even don't need necessarily online PET necessarily. So for R&D purposes, this is maybe helpful to describe the process, to find the models, and to define the predictive models. But we found good cases where then later in manufacturing you can just run those lines on the typical soft PET parameters. Yeah. So it's easier than described sometimes, and we think the industry will go on learning on that in the future, and then try to reduce the complexity again, which is sometimes in these R&D rigs embedded. Yeah.
So thank you, presenters, for your answers, and thank you, audience members, for your questions. Before I finish the webinar, I'd like to ask our presenters, Dr. Debalder and Ms. Steiner, if they have any closing remarks. So, Mr. Debalder, would you have any closing remarks or final comments?
Well, I first of all would like to thank the audience to take the time to participate in this webinar. I'm pleased to see that there is a lot of interest in the industry. We see that in conferences a lot, and I see that in this webinar as well. And I hope that, me and my colleagues will be able to keep on informing you on the progresses of where we are with continuous manufacturing. And hopefully, in a few years, you will be giving a webinar where we can come and listen.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, this is the same from my end. Many thanks to the audience listening to us. Great setup, and I just want to point out, don't be afraid to look out for new cheese. Do your assessments, business case assessments, and you will enjoy the journey to implement continuous manufacturing in the future.
Thank you both for your comments, and I would like to take this opportunity to thank our presenters, once more, Lawrence Debalder, a Senior Principal Engineer of Continuous Manufacturing at Johnson & Johnson, and Richard Steiner, Business Development Manager at GEA Group, for sharing their knowledge with us. I would also like to remind our audience that you can view this and other webinars on demand by visiting biopharma-asia.com/on-demand-webinars. And if you are watching this on demand, then please feel free to send your questions over to me at stephen.edwards@biopharma-asia.com. We'll get those answers back to you. Thank you, everyone. Have a great day.